You're listening to the Staging Sips podcast with Lori Fisher. This podcast is dedicated to helping real estate staging CEOs build healthy businesses that grow, flow, and thrive. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so happy to be with you, and I am super happy to bring to you an amazing conversation I had with Leah of Villanova Insurance Partners. If you're not familiar, Villanova Insurance Partners is actually RISA's exclusive insurance partner. So they come with some great credentials, and they are my personal business's insurance partner. So they are phenomenal. In today's conversation, Leah is going to share with you all kinds of information that you should be thinking about to cover your assets. It's part of that cover your assets theme of episodes that we have. But what you should be looking for inside of your insurance coverage, situations and scenarios that you may want to protect against, things that you might want to think about, making sure you have in your contract, and all the goods around insurance. It really was a really eye-opening conversation. So I hope that you find something in here that is super actionable for your business. Okay, so without further ado, here's my conversation with Leah Check. So hey, Leah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Lori, I'm so happy to be here. I'm so excited, to talk with you and talk about insurance. It's not everyone's favorite topic, but I promise we can try and make it as interesting as possible.
I know. And that's one of the things that I love about all of you at Villanova is that every time I hear you talk, I learn something new and interesting because you do actually make it kind of fun and interesting. So let me start off with that because I'm curious about the history of, formerly Penn X. I've been with you since you were Penn X, to now Villanova. How did you actually start serving stagers in the staging industry?
Yeah, that's great. So my predecessor, Judy Phobes, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, she was incredible. She's the one that brought me into the insurance industry, and she was an incredible mentor. She's since retired and, is enjoying her time. But she originally started with Shell back in 2007 when the staging industry kind of started to take off, and many developments in terms of the insurance being offered. The biggest concern was that when you go to your local agents don't know what a stager is. Like oftentimes you'll get those like blank stares or like that like kind of awkward phone, like, yeah, what is that? Like there's those moments of just like awkwardness where they're not exactly sure what category to place you in. Are you a contractor? Are you an interior designer? But as we all know, you're a stager and your role is incredibly crucial. And the industry, over the past 2 decades has definitely exploded. And we've seen a lot going on in the market, especially since COVID. So long story short is my colleague, clap or whatever. So my predecessor, Judy Phobes, started working with Shell from RISA, and from there expanded across the staging industry to work with different leaders and different individuals that had their own niche markets of the staging industry, the interior design industry, and then also the home organizing industry that's also taken off recently. So when she was branded as Penn X worked with RISA to provide that insurance. And then Judy was purchased by Villanova Insurance Partners. And when that partnership came to be, it combined the insurance as offered by Penn X and the risk management services of Villanova. So what that is now we have the insurance portion and we have the risk management services that are provided through an in-house legal team that give our stagers access to contracts, state-specific contracts in comparison to state law. New York and California, we're looking at you. Those laws are tight. And then subcontractor agreements, those 1099s get very confusing. And if you go through one lawsuit with them, it's enough to take you out of business. So that's been huge for our legal department to really touch on with our stagers. And they're also just there as a support for our stagers. Like if something comes up and they're not quite sure how to handle something that turns contentious with the client, the legal team's there to really support you and represent you. So it's not your name that's now associated with this huge claim. It's you can kind of move on and focus on your business while the legal department takes care of whatever circumstances surrounding that claim is. So in a long format, basically what happened is that Judy and Villanova came together to provide the risk management and insurance services for the stagers in a program that's called RISA Share.
Which is such an amazing benefit. And it's so true because when I started in the industry back in 2011,
Mhm.
exactly what you said happened. I went to my local agents. I went to a few, and none of them had any idea what staging was. Today, I'm sure it's more well known, but it wasn't until I started working with Judy at Penx that I realized like how inadequately insured I was because
Mhm.
I just didn't have somebody who knew what we did. So I'd love to break those two pieces apart. So the insurance and then the risk management, if a little bit, if we can, because I'd love to
Absolutely. Yeah.
know like so first of all, you mentioned that from an insurance perspective, you work with people all over the country. So I think that's important for our listeners. We have people all over the US. We actually have stagers who listen from other countries as well. So I'm curious about kind of jurisdiction wise, how far does Villanova reach for insurance? Is anybody from any state or province
Mhm.
or
We're across the United States, including Hawaii and Alaska. And then we are working to get into Canada. COVID really set back that experience. Just Canadian law is different than US law.
Mhm.
So my counterpart, Joe, who's our legal department, is able to get into the nitty gritty with that. All I know is what I'm told is we're not quite in Canada yet, but the US primarily, we're focused there. Again, anywhere in the continental United States. A lot of people have issues getting insurance in Florida, California, New York, like those places that are high risk just based on where they are in the country. And for California, especially because it's a very, high claim state, like people are very quickly to take you to court there. So we do a lot of our business out in California currently, which makes for some great work trips, but because we're located outside of Philadelphia. So when the four seasons hit, we're like any excuse we can to get to California or Florida, we're taking.
I love it. So, okay. So then I think this is really fantastic. So for anybody who is in the continental US, if
Mhm.
you are not happy at all with your insurance, I definitely recommend that you reach out to Leah and Villanova, and we'll get those links in the show notes and all of that for you. But
Mhm.
if somebody does not have your company available to them for insurance, what are some of the key things that they may want to be looking for in terms of insurance for their business?
Mhm.
So say they're in Canada.
Yep. The first and foremost one they're going to be looking for is general liability insurance. So what that is like when you have a general liability policy, your limits may be 1 million, 2 million, 2 million, 4 million. Like when you go to an agent will say to you like, "Oh, I can offer you quotes for X, Y, and Z type of limits." But what the policy actually covers is that's covering damages to your client's homes. You as a stager, when you go into their home and you're found responsible for theft, fire damage, water damage. We had one incident where a stager left a door unlocked and didn't realize it, and wild squirrels got into the home and like completely destroyed the furniture over the course of a weekend. Like there was 2 days where there were no showings, completely destroyed it. So at any point in your relationship with your client where you're found responsible for damages to their home, that's a general liability claim. The other part of the general liability policy covers innocent third parties. So what that means is that if this doesn't include you or anyone you bring on the job to work because you guys are there for business purposes, but this includes someone like example being the client says, "Lori did a fantastic job. Like I want you to come see what she did to her friend." Her friend comes into the house. She trips over a rug and gets injured. She sits in a chair and gets injured. That's an innocent third party because the person wasn't there to do work, which
Mhm.
is like what you would be or anyone you're bringing on the job. So if they're injured, that's also a general liability claim. So those are the two really big ones for general liability that you're covered for. And that's where the major risk comes from when you are a stager. The other big component we would be remiss not to talk about is your inventory. If your inventory is covered while it's in the home, if it's covered in transit from like your warehouse or wherever you store it to the home, and then while it's at the warehouse, making sure that you have coverage for these general liability claims to the homeowner's like house, but also making sure that your inventory and your property that you're bringing onto that job, there's also coverage for that as well. So that in like a short format, that's what a general liability policy does. That's what that covers. And you just want to make sure that your policy has coverage across the board for your inventory and then has coverage for any claim that's going to occur in a homeowner's house that you're found responsible for.
And that was the big area that mine was
Mm-hmm.
missing, was that coverage of insurance, a coverage of my inventory while in someone else's home,
Yeah.
which was like so eye-opening when I realized that. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the questions that people seem to ask a lot in our Facebook groups in relationship to claims is people worry that filing claims will increase their rate of insurance. So I guess my question is, one, is that true? And if it is true, is there like a threshold or a benchmark that people can use to guide them when they actually file a claim through you, or they handle it, in some other way?
And from a personal standpoint.
Personal side, yep.
So that's where it becomes interesting. Like as Villanova, we can be an agent, which means that we send your business out to an outside carrier, such as Hanover, Travelers, CNA, Hartford, one of those. Or we can be your insurance company directly if you're part of our in-house like captive program. So from that standpoint, there's basically two things that can happen. When you go to file a claim, one, you have to look at your deductible. So do you have like a $500 deductible? Do you have a $1,000 deductible? Generally, if the damage is below your deductible, you're not going to file the claim. But I feel like people kind of forget that they have deductible. So it's always a good point to go and check like, hey, what is my deductible? Make sure my team knows so that when damages do occur, you guys can accurately report the damage and the estimated cost of those damages. And then the other portion is that these claims is that it really is like, it's the toughest part of being in insurance is because everyone wants to call and give me, what's an estimated price? What's an estimated, and as much as you want to give a ballpark answer, the hardest part, like as human beings, we latch on to that first number we hear. So if you say to someone, the ballpark for an insurance premium is 300 to 500, they're only hearing the 300 number, which like, I don't blame them. When I go shopping for a car, I'm like, oh, they said it was 10 grand. What do you mean there's extra fees? Like,
right.
It's the same thing. Like you latch on to what you want to hear. So with the claims, it ends up being at the discretion of the carrier. So like you could go to Hanover, for example, and file a claim, and Hanover could increase your premium by like 25% the next year because Hanover's specific book of claims may be experiencing a tremendous amount of loss. So we've seen that a lot since COVID is like during COVID times, there was a ton of break-ins, a ton of squatters, a lot of issues like that. So like certain carriers experienced a high volume of loss during those times. So now almost 4 years later, basically 4 years later this week, is the insurance premiums are renewing at like 30% more expensive because the carriers are trying to make up for that money that they lost during those years. So in short, it's at the discretion of the carrier and like what the carrier's loss ratio is at that point. And then also not every carrier, depending on the situation is never comforting for someone to hear, but like depending on the situation, if it's like an employee theft or something like that, the carrier may not cover that depending on what your coverages are. So that's why I always encourage people to have like really concrete conversations with like your insurance agent. I'm always happy to discuss like policies with people just because being in insurance, I always can read the documents and, break it down a little quicker. But I always encourage people at least once a year, have a full like what if conversation with your agent. I know it's like mind numbing and the last thing you probably want to do, but like when you have that information at your disposal and you can write it down, it makes things so much easier for you, especially when you're going to file the claims. So our recommendation always as a rule is like probably don't file more than 2 claims a year. If you're filing more than 2 claims a year, one, you need to take a look at your business practices and like where you're keeping your inventory. If there's break-ins, if you're having issues at that location, like it's probably worth the extra money to go down the street to a more secure location. And then our other thing is just like making sure that you're doing business in a way that like you would be proud of if an insurance adjuster came to you and said like, show me what you do every day. So that means like not cutting corners, hiring people that have insurance, hiring people that you trust, having those subcontractor agreements, like making sure that your business is ironclad in the terms of the way you operate so that when those claims do arise, you have the best possible chance of having them covered.
Got it. I think that's really great, that idea. The synergy is a lot of what we do and what I teach students in through the staging business school is operations and processes. And I don't think I spend enough time. This is a great example of how one more way that those things can help serve you in a time of need. So that's really interesting. So one of the things that in the past, like when I've worked with a furniture rental company, they will have the homeowner add them as additionally insured. Is that something that you recommend for staging business owners as well? Or is there another vehicle you think is better?
It's the most common practice, I would say. So oftentimes what they mean by additional insured, for anyone who's like, what's that? It's like you get a certificate of insurance that basically is a snapshot of your coverages. So it's going to be your limits, when your policy expires, your policy number, and then it'll have your insurance carrier at the top. So often when stagers go to bid on jobs or submit, we just had a presentation 2 weeks ago. We were talking about this exact topic because people were like, I don't want to present that I'm insured and then like have someone take advantage of me and be like, oh, their insurance is going to cover it if it's a claim that I'm not responsible for.
Right.
That's definitely an ongoing issue. So I always say to them, like, you can slip into conversation like, hey, just so you know, I'm insured, and like not give them any additional details until they ask for them, like, from you. But in terms of the additional insured situation you were talking about specifically, what that means is that basically the client just wants to know for sure that any damages that happen to their home while you're there, that they're covered for. So what they're asking to have their name and their address as an additional insured on your policy for the duration of time while you're working there. So like you'll email the office, we send over the COI. It's very simple, like, to get the paperwork, but the meaning behind it is just for the stagers to know that like you can offer this as like a kind of a perk essentially for your clients so that they know, because oftentimes homeowners policies aren't going to cover if a stager's inventory is stolen. Like, it's not going to cover if like the stager puts a hole in the wall. Like, it's like the homeowner's policy is going to be like, okay, you had them working in your home. Where's their insurance? Like, that's really what it boils down to. So it's basically just a vehicle for you to prove to someone that you're insured. These are the insurances I have. And like, you should feel comfortable having me in your home because you know that I'm properly insured. I'm insured. And like, as we said before, not every stager wants that to be so forefront, just depending on like who they're working with.
Gotcha. And do you recommend that though as like something that people should really consider? Or what are the scenarios where they shouldn't do it? Where you
I feel like best practice, business practice is like, I mean, from the standpoint of the client, like your client shouldn't be bringing people into the home that aren't insured. Like, that's concern number one. Like, why would they want someone in their home who's not insured? Because then that falls on them and their insurance. So like, that's just making sure you're knowing who you're working with. But from my standpoint, I'm always going to stand from the fact of like, you should lay it out on the table with people and be totally honest and say like, this is my insurance. This is what I have. Like, you don't have to go into the details of the limits, but like at least saying like, I am licensed or like I am insured is the best way to do business, I would say, just so that everyone's on equal playing field. But there is the caveat to this ends up being that like, if your client brings in a painter and the painter isn't insured, so like, does that make sense? Like, are you following? So like the client brings in the painter, but you're working there as well and like staging the home. What happens if that painter damages the wall or something? Like, and that painter doesn't have insurance. Is the client then going to come to you and say like, you have to put this under your insurance and blame you? Like, that's where the risk comes in, where people aren't so inclined to be as upfront with the certificate of insurance, because I think their fear is that like, are they going to be responsible for something that they're not? And like, that's where the best part about insurance is like, if this claim does come up and your client like is coming after you for that, the insurance company is going to fight the claim on your behalf and say like, no, my client wasn't responsible for that room. That room was only the painter. Like, and then like, because the insurance company, that's what they're there for. Like, they're not going to just pay out claims to pay it out. Like, they're going to want to best represent their client and make sure that like they're not paying for something that their client didn't do, because then it becomes a loss on like the loss history of the stager. And you don't want that, because as we said before, the loss history can impact your overall premium. So in short, it's like you have the choice between presenting the certificate of insurance so that everyone is on equal playing field and everyone fully understands what goes on. You also may be required, if you're working in like a high rise or like a gated community, like there's a chance they may not let you on the property without a certificate of insurance. In New York, that's incredibly common. Florida as well. Like, they will not let you even step foot in the elevator without having the certificate of insurance to be able to do work there. And then on the other half, it's like you also don't want to be responsible for things that you did not do in terms of damages with the home, which is why we always recommend like a contract with your client, getting those reviewed by an attorney. You can add anything you want in terms of like, if you hire someone else to bring into the home, like you're in charge of making sure they're properly insured. It's not going to fall back on me. Like, you can include those things as part of your contract, and our legal team's here at your disposal to do that. So that's always a recommendation, is like to have a great contract and have insurance, and you should be good to go.
It's so funny because that was literally my next question for you.
Mm-hmm.
As we were talking about it was, are there things that you think that are an absolute must have in the contract that relates to exactly this, protecting yourself, that you would recommend people like check their contracts right now to see if they have this languaging?
A lot of it is like, full disclosure, I'm not an attorney. Like, I'm not licensed as an attorney, and that's where my counterpart Joe comes in. I also would recommend like maybe one day we'll come back and talk to you as both of us, because he's incredible from the legal standpoint. I feel like he's a lawyer. He can captivate a room sometimes with like the way he speaks about it. But Joe always says like, you want to make sure that you have an indemnification. Oh my gosh, I can't speak today. Here's the clap.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you have a contract that indemnifies you and holds you harmless. Mm-hmm. So those are two very big, like, in terms of legal jargon, things that you want in your contract. So basically what that means is that like the client is responsible. Like, I'm actually going to backtrack here and not get into legal explanations of it, because I feel like that's Joe's department. So I don't want to give any false information.
Sure.
So
nope.
Maybe cut that part out. But I can definitely say from like, what they should be looking for in a contract is they should have something that indemnifies them and holds them harmless when working with the client. And then also making sure that like the client, it like says explicitly, like the client is responsible for checking that any individual working in the home has insurance. Like, you can have that exact language in there, but any other questions on the deep-seated portions of legal terminology, I would refer to Joe, just because he's better equipped to handle that.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I totally appreciate that. So, and then going back really quickly, as you were talking about, if the painter is on property and the painter has damage, do you recommend that people take site photos, like before install, site photos, end of day, just as another form of protection? And are photos or video better? Is there, I'm just curious about that too.
I feel like the photos always would be better, because a photo would last longer. In terms of like, a video could get lost, get deleted. But also we have to be realistic. Like, the way the staging community works, like, you guys are doing installs constantly every other day, and sometimes like depending on your amount of inventory. So not necessarily like the owner of the business may not be on every single install. Like, that just may not. So you can rely on your employees to take those pictures. But what happens if someone forgets? You don't want it to turn into this whole, issue. And when it comes to the insurance companies, they're only going to be looking at the damages. Like, the before is kind of going to be subjective to like what the client says and what the stager says. And realistically, unless it's a fraud situation, both of those accounts are going to match up, like probably by like 90%, like in terms of like what the stager views and what the client views in the home. But because like even the stager can say, we did a claim this year where the stager was like, the floor was discolored, but like, it's not like the floors were freshly varnished, or like they were discolored because the rug was placed down there and the client wanted the floors to be ripped up. So the stager can fully admit, the floor was discolored, but like I told them it was going to be discolored, and the client still wanted to file the claim. So that's the client's prerogative. If they feel like their house was damaged, they can still file that claim. And the stager still can admit, oh yeah, like it's not the same color it was before, but that's a natural occurrence because of the sunlight coming into the home. So what that stager did is, actually moving forward, he included as part of his contract specifically to make sure like that there wasn't an issue with the flooring moving forward. He added he has an addendum on his contract that like directly says like, if sunlight damages the home and it's unvarnished flooring, I'm not responsible, because he didn't want to have to pay out additional claims. Yeah. Like, he didn't want the insurance on his behalf. So at the end of the day, you can take those photos. You can be diligent with that as much as you can. But what it really comes down to is the damages and what they're looking at in terms of the account of like what you're saying happened in terms of the damages, and what the client says happened in terms of the damages. Because again, like I said, unless it's a fraud scenario, there's not really going to be a ton of discrepancy between what happened. There is going to be the basic points of what occurred should be agreeable.
Gotcha. Well, it's interesting because we had a situation that happened several years ago where there was at the end of D stage day, the homeowner claimed that we had put a huge gouge in her wood floor. And I knew everything that we brought in and I had been in
Mhm.
business for 9 years and we'd never had any issue. And I knew the
Right.
things that we had brought in could not have damaged the floor that way. But what I did know is that she had a a sofa that had been left behind for staging that had a
Mhm.
sofa bed that was broken. And they moved that. We didn't move that.
Oh,
And it was so scary though, thinking because she was like, it's the foyer. And, we had sold the house, like the house had sold immediately, but she was telling us we needed to repair, replace, restain
right.
all of
Rip
the
up the
first
floor.
floor, all of
Mhm.
it. Like, and I was really, really nervous, and we didn't have any pictures of it, but I knew that's exactly what it was. And when I brought that to her attention, all of a sudden, oh, I was able to fix it with some stain or something like that.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
it was really unsettling that somebody could fraudulently claim that we
Bring
had
that
done
up.
something. Hmm.
And that I think also comes back to like that's a testament to you of knowing your inventory and knowing what could potentially occur. Because like you said, if you're not bringing anything into the home that can make a huge gouge in wooden floors, you're like, how is this like falling on me? Unless like that
Yeah,
doesn't make any sense
yeah.
objectively. So I feel like that's also where the diligence really comes in terms of making sure you know how much of your inventory is in the home, the estimated cost of those inventory. Because like if a claim does occur, because most times with stagers, it's the damage to the client's home is like holes in the wall, like stains on the rugs, that type of thing. Like we had a stager that had an issue with a vase and like they damaged a vase when they were moving it. And like those are going to be minor damages. Like we were talking most likely under $5,000 for those. So they're
Mhm.
not going to be like huge issues to like the insurance carriers aren't going to fight back and forth with it. But if you have a fire and like your inventory is in there and like you lose all that inventory and say you're staging at home and you have $200,000 of inventory, we had that happen. And the stager's like, I don't know what was in there. Like that's the bigger issue because the insurance company is going to come to you and say like, I need some type of proof of like, you can't just give me a number. Like they need some type of concrete evidence showing that like it's your inventory that was damaged. So that's why I say is a bigger piece of like being really mindful of the value of your inventory quarterly, at least like taking stock of your items, figuring out what's damaged, what needs repair, what you could obtain more of, that type of thing, and either cataloging it in like Excel or the one staging resource that everyone uses. It's like Staging Coach or something like that. I'm messing up the name there, but there's some type of resource where you can
Yeah.
like catalog it all. And that's also a big recommendation is just like doing that quarterly to make sure that you know your inventory backwards and forwards and you know the value of it. So if you ever do lose it, you are getting what you deserve from it.
And when you say concrete proof, what is considered concrete proof? Do you need receipts for those purchases, or is it just some document that existed before the
Mm-hmm.
claim?
It's going to be basically like an Excel document. I always say that you could have like the item, the estimated cost of the item, and then because like I said before, the insurance companies we're looking at the damages. Like we want like the gore of it. We want to see the worst of it so that we can really like be like, all right, what is this? What am I looking at? And then your back end responsibility is just going to be able to say like, oh, this was a sofa worth $2,000. Like you don't really, you're not going to need, they're not going to come to you and say like, when did you buy this? That type of thing. At least like our internal claims department isn't going to do that.
Mhm.
But an outside carrier, like we don't have control over them. So they may ask you for that type of thing. So my thing is like anytime you buy it, like I said, quarterly, taking stock of that inventory and saying like, this is what I had, this is what's damaged. Like if you do end up doing the photo, like some people catalog things through the photos,
Mhm.
that's definitely an undertaking, which I feel like it's very hard to maintain that. So if you do that, it's a great solution, but at the end of the day, we have to be realistic in like what the stagers are doing day in and day out. And most of them are not going to be cataloging every piece of furniture they buy. So as long as you have a photo post stage of what's in the home and how it looks, that's going to help you.
Gotcha. Photos posted. Yeah. And I know more and more people now, because we have more tools available to us, are using inventory systems.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, I think if anybody's starting new with any inventory system, it makes the most sense to categorize those large ticket, large items.
Mm-hmm.
You're likely not going to quibble over if, a vase from Home Goods for $30, but,
Right.
like knowing that you have, to your point, a sofa that's $2,000 is a very different thing. So just a little recommendation to our listeners out there.
And the other thing I just would want to piggyback on that, because it's top of mind right now, is that like when you do catalog that inventory amount and like you're looking at it and you're like, oh, my inventory amount says, make sure it corresponds to your policy. So like the property amount that's listed on your policy, if it's only at $25,000 and your inventory amounts increase to $50,000 and you're halfway through your policy year, you have to let your insurance company know that so they can increase the inventory amount that's on your policy. Because if you don't, the insurance company, if a claim occurs, is only going to pay out what's listed on the policy. So if you put all your inventory in a house or it's in two different houses and something happens and both houses get damaged to both of them, they're only going to pay out $25,000, even though your total amount of inventory was 50. So making sure that limit of what's on your policy matches your estimated value of it is also crucial.
So I think that's really important for people who are in parts of the country where there are catastrophic, large geographical events that are likely to happen: hurricanes, tornadoes, fires, things like that, flooding. I think that is really great advice to make sure that you do your due diligence, and not to say that random things can't happen. I also live in Philadelphia and live in the neighborhood that was struck by a tornado 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Random. Wouldn't have ever thought that I would need to plan for something like that in general in life, never mind for your business, which is a great point, because we could have had a house staged with inventory that had a tree go right through it.
Exactly.
All of that.
And with that situation, it was completely, out of the blue. Like, I don't remember in my time living in Philadelphia, and I'm sure you, where we had tornadoes and tornado warnings. I remember being in the office and being like, where do we go? Like a basement? I don't even think we have one of those. How am I supposed to survive this? I'm saying that laughing, but thankfully nothing happened. No one else I know was hurt. But from a business standpoint, it's you have one of those catastrophic events, that can completely take you out of business, especially if you're freshly starting out. So I always say those first couple of years, build it into your system, do it quarterly. So that way it becomes part of your business routine and you're not 15 years down the line, it's always slipping your mind because you didn't build it in as part of your business practices. Insurance, really what it comes down to, it's a tool in your toolbox to make sure your business runs smoothly. So utilizing it to the best of your abilities is only going to help your business thrive in the long run.
Yeah, that's great. Now, one of the things I was thinking about too, as you were talking, is there anything that would negate your ability to use your insurance? Say, for example, in a storage facility, are there things that I don't even know? I'm just thinking floodplains, or you know what I mean? Things like that.
So every insurance policy is going to come with exclusions, and some of those exclusions, like flood, can be excluded if it's ground up. That can be an exclusion on the policy. Same thing as terrorism, that type of thing. If it's intentional terrorism, that can be part of it. There's always going to be some type of exclusion on the policy. We had one stage where we wanted to file a claim for smell, and you can't, the insurance company is not going to cover a claim for smell. There was a smell coming into the storage unit from another unit. And unfortunately in that situation, that becomes an issue with the landlord, and the landlord of the storage facility has to get involved because there's no way to cover smell on the policy. It's different if there's a fire and there's smoke left over and the items is not usable. But if it's just a foul odor, that's not going to be covered. So every policy is going to have exclusions, and the exclusions are pretty basic across the board. Most carriers, they don't really waver from one or the other. And with the industry, we see the same claims over and over again. The claims are always fire, they're always theft, there's always some type of water damage when a pipe bursts. There's not really anything out of the ordinary except for a wild squirrel every now and then, or animals getting into the home that you're just how does that happen? But those things do happen, and there's no way to prevent every single thing that could potentially occur. But any major exclusion is going to be across the board, across the industry. They're always going to exclude hurricane, because that's where the state, without getting too nitty gritty, that's where the state fund comes in and the state insurance policies get involved, because it's an it's a national disaster to that area. So there has to be some type of relief.
Gotcha.
So in short, the exclusion portion of it, it's never like it's more important to know what you're covered for, I guess, than rather what you're covered against is always going to be my advice. So have the conversations about the what ifs, but your policy documents are always there for you to read if you really want to watch paint dry. But if not, always talk to your agent because they're there to help.
Well, and it sounds like that you get a lot of this. So I'm curious if you have any other scenarios that you've encountered other than the ones that you've shared that could like be informative to people. So that
we had a big one with the rags with like a warehouse, like flammable rags we're putting in a trash can from like wiping down like furniture, like the like wiping down the furniture, and what the chemical that was used with the flammable rags completely burst into flame. They lost $250,000 worth of inventory. This is where Joe comes in really well because Joe, as with the attorney being the head of the claims, like deals with all of them on a one-on-one basis. So I always says he like puts the fear of God in people while like making them laugh at the same time. So that's another good one is like just like when you're working in a warehouse, like making sure anything flammable, like you're using it in a conscientious manner, because a lot of our stagers, like they do dabble into the interior design industry. Like we've seen an increased amount of crossover between those two industries, as well as like the home organizing that like they're coming into play a little bit more too. So like stagers are starting to dip their hand like in everything, you know, just depending on how business is. So I feel like when it comes down to it, it's like, again, what you're doing, like think twice before you do something, before you're like, oh, those rags will be fine, I'll get them tomorrow. Like maybe they won't. Just take the extra 5 minutes, be late to dinner and take care of it then. Another thing I would watch out for is tools. I can't even tell you how many claims we've had. And this is outside of a general liability claim of like someone working for the stager and they're hanging art or something like that. And they're getting serious injuries in their hands because they're just not paying attention to what they're doing. That's a workers' comp claim because you're injured while working. Yeah. So in that standpoint, if you're hiring people to come and work for you, even if they're just 1099 subcontractors, if they're injured, that falls on you. Like you are responsible as the stager because you hired them to come on that job. So like if you don't have a workers' comp policy in place or they don't have a workers' comp policy in place for themselves, then you can be stuck paying for that out of pocket, and that can turn into a civil suit. Like that is the biggest area with the injuries, where when you are bringing people onto the job, you need to make sure that they're properly insured, or you need to get the proper insurance to cover them. So that's just the from a claim standpoint, that's always going to be our biggest concern.
Gotcha.
Things are replaceable, people are not. So
yeah,
I feel like if you practice with that in mind, it's always a great way to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that flammable rag thing is so interesting because I actually know somebody whose house burned down. They were in the building process, and that's exactly how the entire house burned down. It's
so concerning. And like it happens more than people think because they just don't think about it. So I feel like that's another good one. But other than that, it's your standard issues across any industry. But the workers' comp portion of it, that is the part that most people get stuck on because someone gets injured and they're like, I didn't realize I was responsible for them. Well, if you're paying them, like you are responsible for them, especially if you're bringing them onto a job.
Yeah. Amazing. Anything else that we should know about before we wrap up today that you think in terms of insurance that you wish people knew or?
Oh, wow. Wish they knew. I mean, I feel like there's so many pros and cons to the insurance industry. I feel like in general, like there's a lot of people out there that are just going to take advantage of the situation, take advantage of like you're not having the knowledge for it. And that's why you see people pay premiums. Like when we go to these conferences, people come up to me and say like, I'm paying $3,000 a year premium for insurance. And I'm like, for what? Like that's crazy. So I feel like the hardest part is like, I feel like do your work, come to people like Lori, come to, the different organizations that can really guide you with vetted vendors to make sure that you're not being taken for a ride. Because for a small business owner, it's always so tough to see them like when they come to me and they're like, I didn't know I was paying so much. And it's like, it's always like, it's really unfortunate to see like they're doing their best to, follow their dreams, and they're being put into a box that they shouldn't be because someone else is, greedy or selfish or is quite frankly uninformed.
Yeah.
So I feel like my biggest advice is just like to do your job and do your due diligence on the back end business stuff. So that way, when you go out and you do stage, you can fully enjoy your craft and fully be invested in the creative portion of it. And knowing that you're covered by your insurance, you're covered through your contracts, and your business is fully protected. And like your assets and your family and you as an individual are also protected.
Yeah. And I just want to say that obviously as a business owner, just like Leah said, you want to do your due diligence. But I've been with, like I said, Penx Villanova for years, and just the sense of relief that comes with it and the level of service too. It always feels like, to me, I'm like, I feel like I'm your only client. You know what I mean? Like you get back very quickly. You're super helpful. And I just really appreciate that about Villanova. So again, we're going to put all the information in the show notes for everybody. Definitely reach out. And I guess the other thing is, I'm not sure if people can even come to you to just review and get more information, quotes and things like that. Yeah.
I'm happy to help. It doesn't have to be, like I said, I don't want anyone ever to feel pressured or forced into something that they're not ready for financially. I can't even tell you, like, my job is to take these calls all day long where I'm like, let's go over your policy. Let's look at what you're covered for. Come back to me in a year when your policy's expired. Because a lot of people don't want to switch midterm, which I get.
Yep.
Or even for the people that are just starting out, they're not quite ready to launch. They just want someone to talk through like what it looks like. And I do these calls all day long because I feel like if it was myself or my siblings or my parents getting into something new, I would want someone also like doing the work that you do, Lori, to like guide them through it. So it's like if my little piece of the puzzle is insurance and like your little piece of the puzzle is staging, like hopefully the person ends up in a better position than someone else that came before them. So like I'm happy to help, happy to reach out. So anything I can do.
That's why you guys are the best. Thank you so much for being here today. This is super, super helpful. And we're so happy to have you. And I hope everybody walks away with at least a nugget or two. I know there are a bunch in here that they can take with them to protect their business. I call these episodes Cover Your Assets.
I love that.
So
that's like the
cover
best
your assets, people.
Hopefully they're enjoying their staging sips with a cocktail too. And it just
right.
up the insurance conversation,
Exactly. And that is your sip for the week, everybody. Have a wicked good week, and I will see you next time on the podcast. Thank you so much for listening to the Staging Sips podcast. If you love what you've learned here today, please take a minute to rate and review it so more staging business owners can find us. And if you want to learn more about how to market and grow your staging business more strategically, I'd love to see you join us inside of the Rethink You Accelerate Mentorship Program. It is open enrollment. You can get more details at rethinkhomeinteriors.com/rethinkyou. Would love to see you inside.